It's leaking oil, smoking, and 3 decades old. You sure you want to fix this junk? The young mechanic laughed, kicking the tire of the battered truck. The old man remained silent, placing the key on the counter, saying nothing. But when they opened the trunk, a special military plate fell out, with a unique Pentagon clearance stamp. The entire shop went quiet. No more laughter. Type honor if you believe sometimes. The quietest people carry the most respectable secrets. Edward Eddie Lane, 76, was a veteran who had served in 3 overseas campaigns, but lived anonymously in suburban Wyoming, where no one knew who he once was. His 1984 Dodge pickup truck was the last possession remaining from his discharge day. The roof was rusted, the bed dented, paint worn, doors patched with duct tape, but the engine still started every morning. That day, he was driving to a special event, a memorial service for Unit 9, a secret unit that had operated deep in enemy territory. He was the last survivor, and today he planned to deliver a handwritten letter from the commanding officer to the family of a young soldier who had fallen. But midway there, the truck began making loud noises, smoke billowing from under the hood. Eddie pulled into the only open repair shop on Route 42. The shop was busy, filled with gleaming SUVs and wealthy customers. When Eddie walked in, wearing a threadbare jacket and an old baseball cap with a faded logo, no one looked up. The young mechanic named Mike frowned. For trucks like this, we usually just recommend the scrapyard. Eddie nodded, not arguing. I just need you to check if it can go another 50 miles. Mike shook his head, lightly kicking the tire. Even my great-grandfather couldn't save this one. Eddie smiled slightly, pulled out an old key wrapped in worn paracord, left it on the counter, then sat quietly in the corner. The truck had been with Eddie through everything. The nightmares after discharge, the lonely moves from town to town, the gradual disappearance of his unit members. He'd maintained it himself for decades, but his hands weren't as steady as they once were. Most repair shops had already turned him away, suggesting he invest in something newer. But Eddie couldn't explain to them that this wasn't transportation. It was the last witness to a life no one believed he'd lived. The shop was clearly upscale, catering to luxury vehicles. Flat-screen TVs mounted on the walls showed sports highlights. The waiting area had leather couches where customers tapped on tablets and smartphones. No one made eye contact with the elderly man in worn clothes. A woman pulled her designer purse closer when Eddie sat nearby. A businessman in a suit took one look at him and moved to another seat. Eddie noticed but wasn't offended. He'd grown accustomed to invisibility over the years. His medals and commendations were locked in a footlocker under his bed, never displayed. The respect he'd once commanded in uniform had faded with his youth and his anonymity. Today mattered, though. Today he needed to fulfill a promise made 45 years ago, in a jungle halfway across the world, to a dying man who'd saved his life. The letter had waited long enough. The young mechanic reluctantly took the keys, muttering something to his colleagues that made them chuckle. Eddie pretended not to notice. He'd faced worse than ridicule. We'll take a look, but don't get your hopes up, Mike called over his shoulder. Could be a couple hours before we even get to it. Eddie settled in, pulling a worn paperback from his pocket, a dog-eared copy of Once an Eagle that had survived 3 tours with him. Time was something he had plenty of these days. Mike opened the hood, inspecting. Oil leaks, broken fan belt, air filter that seemed like it had never been replaced. When he opened the trunk to remove the old toolbox, a metal container fell out, unlocked, revealing a small plate. Mike bent down to pick it up. On it was an embossed seal, Pentagon-Cleared, Black Ops Unit 9. A series of numbers that matched codes he'd learned during military training, reserved only for highly classified units, existing in shadow records. He stood frozen, then called the head mechanic, Marcus, a former Afghanistan rescue soldier. Marcus held the plate, looked at Eddie, and immediately walked over, removing his hat to salute formally. Sir, are you really a member of Unit 9? Eddie slowly. I was the 3rd shooter. They're all gone now. Just me. And this truck. No more noise in the shop. A female customer turned away, hand covering her mouth. Marcus said to Mike, Drop everything? I'll fix this truck with my own hands. They worked through lunch, replacing belts, welding pipes, adding oil, restoring parts that should have been scrapped. Eddie sat outside, not asking questions, but his eyes were wet. When the truck started again, the entire shop applauded, not for the technical achievement, but for something no one dared name: respect. Marcus placed his hand on Eddie's shoulder. "You won't be going alone, sir." Mike had been a mechanic for 5 years, but had never seen Marcus like this. The head mechanic worked with methodical intensity, cursing when parts wouldn't cooperate, refusing help from the others. "This isn't just a truck," Marcus had explained quietly. "Unit 9 was, well, they don't teach about them in history books." While they worked, other customers waited patiently, their irritation melting away as word spread through the shop. The woman who had clutched her purse earlier approached Eddie with coffee. The businessman who had moved seats stood awkwardly nearby, finally asking, "Korea or Vietnam, sir?" Eddie simply smiled. "A bit of everywhere." The repair required improvisation. Modern parts didn't fit the old Dodge, so Marcus fabricated connections, modified components, and at one point called a friend who collected vintage vehicles to source a critical gasket. As they worked, Eddie sat watching, occasionally answering questions from curious bystanders, though never in detail. He didn't mention jungle operations or midnight extractions. He didn't describe the sound a helicopter makes when it's trying to land in a clearing too small for its rotors. He didn't name the countries where Unit 9 had operated without official acknowledgement. A local police officer who had stopped for an oil change recognized the significance of the plate and stood nearby, almost at attention. When his radio called, he stepped outside to respond, returning to whisper something to Marcus. By early afternoon, a small crowd had gathered. No one seemed in a hurry anymore. The TV was switched from sports to news, where a brief mention scrolled across the bottom: "Memorial service for classified Vietnam-era unit to be held today." The final test came when Marcus turned the key. The engine coughed twice, then roared to life, settling into a steady rumble that sounded smoother than it had in years. I stood there and realized, no one is born to be remembered, but some people live as symbols. Even though they never asked for a single medal, type legend if you think there are quiet people who deserve the world's respect. Eddie silently got into the truck, about to say thanks when Marcus stopped him. "No, sir. This is our part to repay." As he prepared to leave the station, Marcus ordered everyone to clear the way. And then, 3 military SUVs were already parked outside, yellow lights flashing. A man in a colonel's uniform stepped out. "Mr. Lane, I have direct orders from command. If we locate you, we are to escort you to the memorial service." Eddie was startled. "I didn't tell anyone." "No need, sir. That plate has its own encrypted chip. We've been monitoring to ensure your safety, ever since you declined burial at Arlington." Eddie laughed. "I just wanted to go quietly." "Sir, men like you are not permitted to go quietly." His truck was placed in the middle. Front and back were 2 escort SUVs. Bulletproof glass, no sirens, but all vehicles on the road automatically moved aside when they saw the flags. When they reached the cemetery, a group was already waiting, not in uniform, but all wearing red badges. "Bloodline of Unit 9. Eddie delivered the letter. The family broke down in tears. No flowery words, no reporters, no background music. Just the last veteran arriving right on time. The procession moved with solemn efficiency. Traffic officers had been alerted and waited at intersections, holding back civilian vehicles. The 3-vehicle convoy drew stares from pedestrians, some instinctively standing straighter as they passed. Eddie's hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, not from age, but from the weight of the moment. He'd imagined this day differently, arriving anonymously, delivering the letter, and slipping away unnoticed. The attention made him uncomfortable. Through his rearview mirror, he saw Marcus and Mike following in Marcus's personal truck, several car lengths behind the official escort. They hadn't asked permission to come, they simply followed. The colonel riding in the lead SUV had explained little during the journey, only that certain units remain monitored in perpetuity for security and recognition purposes. "Your commander insisted on it," the colonel had said through his open window at a stoplight. "Said his men deserved to be remembered, even if their missions couldn't be." The cemetery was a private one. not military, nestled against rolling hills. A simple stone marker stood under an oak tree, engraved only with Unit 9 in a series of dates. No names, no ranks, no locations. Gathered around it were about 20 people, mostly elderly, a few middle-aged, and some younger faces that carried familiar features of their older companions. A man stepped forward as Eddie parked, gray-haired but standing military straight. "Staff Sergeant Richards," he introduced himself. "My father was Captain Richards. He spoke of you." Eddie nodded. "Your father saved us all in Laos." "The operation that never happened," the man said with a knowing smile. Others approached, introducing themselves as children and grandchildren of Unit 9 members. They knew few details of their relatives or service, only that they had been part of something important and classified. Eddie reached into his jacket and removed an envelope, yellowed with age. The handwriting faded but still legible. He handed it to a woman in her 50s. "Your father wrote this before his last mission. He asked me to deliver it when the time was right." The woman accepted it with trembling hands. "He never told us anything about his service, just that someday someone might come with a message." As she opened it, others gathered around. Eddie stepped back, giving them privacy with words written nearly half a century ago. The colonel approached, standing at Eddie's side. "Command would still welcome your official statement, sir." Eddie shook his head. "Some missions are best left in the shadows, Colonel." The officer nodded, understanding. "Then we're just here to honor, not record." After the letter was read, after tears were shed and hands clasped in recognition of shared legacy, they gathered in a circle around the stone marker. No speeches were given. Instead, they observed 2 minutes of perfect silence, for missions undocumented, sacrifices unrecorded, and heroes uncelebrated. A few weeks later, people passing the repair shop noticed something unusual. The M&M Auto Repair sign had been replaced with Unit 9 Motorworks, where service means sacrifice. Marcus established a veteran support fund. All revenue from the 9th of each month was donated. Mike, the young mechanic, became a volunteer, later enlisting in the military. And Eddie, no one saw him again. But one day a silver-bearded man stopped by the shop, placing an old can containing a plate on the counter. On it was written, "For the next soldier. Fix it for free." They kept that plate, hanging it on the shop wall. Beneath it engraved, "Not all medals are worn." The shop's transformation became a local legend. What had once been a luxury service center became a gathering place for veterans. Coffee was always free for anyone who had served. A bulletin board featured job postings specifically for ex-military. The waiting area now displayed books about military history instead of sports magazines. Marcus never spoke publicly about what had happened that day, but he didn't need to. Word had spread organically through the veteran community. On the first anniversary of Eddie's visit, a surprise arrived, a small package delivered by military courier. Inside was a shadow box containing a Unit 9 patch with a handwritten note, "Last man standing sends his regards. No return address, no explanation needed." Mike returned from basic training on leave, proudly showing Marcus his assignment papers. He'd been selected for specialized mechanical support for special operations units. "Full circle," Marcus had said, clapping him on the shoulder. The original plate remained the centerpiece of the shop, mounted in a custom frame made by a local craftsman. Customers often asked about it, receiving only the simplified version of the story. Some things Marcus believed were meant to stay private, but for those who knew, for the veterans who nodded solemnly when they saw it, the message was clear. Some journeys aren't reported in the news, but for those truly deserving, the whole world will make way, just so they can reach where they need to be. Subscribe to TT Hero Stories if you believe honor isn't about where you arrive, but how people welcome you when you do. TT Hero Stories, because some heroes never stop serving.